If you were responsible for setting up functions on your cluster and provided the service account minimum permissions on the namespace, you likely used pulsarctl to log into the server and give that service account produce, consume, functions, and packages permissions. You were logged into the server as an admin account at the time you did that with pulsarctl. Now as a developer, you're going to be using pulsarctl logged in as the service account to deploy functions to that namespace. So if you haven't already installed pulsarctl, I've provided a link to the GitHub repo after the video that gives directions on installing it for various operating systems. I used brew tap StreamNative, and then brew install pulsarctl to install it. And at this point, when I type in pulsarctl, I should be able to see the help document here. Now again, we're going to be logging in as the service account to deploy our functions. And to get to the code to log in as that account, I'm going to go back over to the UI. And here I am in StreamNative.io, and I've clicked on Pulsar Clients on the left side of the screen. I'm going to go to CLI Tools, pulsarctl, click Next. We don't need to download the CLI tools because I've already installed it with brew, and we verified that we get the help menu from terminal. Click Next. Select your service account, and mine is called MyFunctions service account that we created previously and gave the correct permissions. If you didn't already download the auth token when you created the account, so you can also get it from the service accounts page when you made it, you can download it now here. And then the client configuration this is the code we need to put into terminal to make our initial connection. You can see that the admin service URL, issuer endpoint, and audience are already pre-populated for this particular cluster. And then the key file we replace with a relative file path to our OAuth token. So our OAuth token I've placed in a file on my desktop. So I need to make sure that, or in a folder in my desktop. So I need to make sure that the file has been moved there, and then I will change this key file path. So pasting in that code here, making sure I'm on the desktop before I do that. I'm going to remove this section in curly braces, and relative to the desktop, I've placed that file in a folder called SNCloudCredentials. And then you'll have to use your particular file path. And it's functions for me is what I called it. So I need two S's there. Service-account.json. This won't connect to the server yet. So I need to go back to the UI and get one more piece of code. So after the client configuration, I click Next to get to admin operation. The tenant namespace and topic here don't matter yet because all I want is the second line of code, pulsarctl OAuth 2 activate. And back here in terminal, if I paste that in, as long as it finds that file correctly and all the permissions are set, we should see logged in as MyFunctions service account and welcome to Pulsar. There's two ways for us to deploy functions. The first is to put all of the flags in the functions create command in pulsarctl, which I'll do first. We'll then just quickly check to see the deployed function. We won't actually test it out. I'll delete it, and then we'll recreate the function using a second method where all of the input data related to the function we put inside of a file. We're now going to deploy our Pulsar function, the HelloWorldEcho function that we created earlier and created the nar and jar files for it. There's two different ways we're going to deploy these. The first is to put all of the different flags directly here in the pulsarctl command. That becomes a bit tedious, and it's hard to then be able to keep track of all the different commands that were used to create our functions. So we're first going to do it that way. I'm going to show you that the function is deployed, and we'll see that it created the input and output topics. We'll delete that function, then we'll recreate it from scratch, but instead we'll put all of that extra information that's needed to create the function inside of a text file. So here in command line, I'll do pulsarctl, and you'll quickly see that this does get very tedious. So pulsarctl. The command we use is functions create. You have to specify the tenant and the namespace where they're going to live. So the tenant here is going to be functiontenant. The namespace is going to be functionnamespace. We already created these and provided the service account permissions to create functions in this namespace. The name of the function is just what does StreamNative Cloud know this as, and we're going to call it functionecho. And then we can specify multiple input topics, so that's why it's called inputs, and we comma separate them, but we're only going to have one. And we specify with the tenant and namespace because technically we could consume from topics or produce to topics outside of the tenant and namespace where the function lives. So function tenant, function namespace, and we would probably have to make sure it had permissions on those, otherwise it wouldn't be able to see them. Namespace. And then the name of the topic is input topic. It doesn't have to already exist. We're going to call input topic 1. For output topic, we don't call it outputs. We just call it output because you can only specify one here. And later we're going to learn how you could route messages to different topics based on some logic. But we won't be doing that here. And we'll call this function tenant, function namespace, and output topic 1. The class name is a required field and is going to be our package and the name of the class that we created, which was HelloWorldEcho. And then finally, we need a reference to our jar file. My jar file, I'm going to use a relative path from the desktop because I created the project within a folder on my desktop. And it happens to be in the MyFiles folder. And then the name of the project was FunctionExamples. And then in the target folder is where the nar and jar files got placed. And then I'm going to do FunctionExamples -1.0 snapshot.jar. So here our function was created successfully. Let's go head on over to the UI and take a look at what the function shows us, as well as some information about the input and output topic. So here I am back in the UI. I've already selected my tenant and namespace here on the left, as well as clicking on the functions tab over here. We can see that the functionecho function has been deployed. It shows us the output topic, the number of input topics, how many messages have been processed, if we had any exceptions thrown, and the number of restarts, as well as that the function is running. If you do see that the function is starting and stopping frequently, you would probably need to contact support potentially to see the logs. You can also click on the function itself to get other information, specifically information about how it was deployed. So you can see a lot of these are things that were placed inside of our pulsarctl command. And then if you go to topics, you'll also see that the input topic was created and the output topic. And for the input topic, you can see that there was a subscription created with our function name as well as a unique identifier. Let's go ahead and delete our function, and we're going to recreate it using a second method where we don't specify everything in flags in the functions create command, but instead place those in a file so it's much easier for us to maintain. So to delete our function, we use the Pulsar Functions delete command, and we use the tenant and namespace, and then the name of the function that we wish to delete. We see that it says deleted successfully, but we want to verify that as well. So we're going to head on over to the UI. And if I go back to the Functions tab, you'll see that the function has been deleted. So in the background of my screen, I have my original pulsarctl command functions create that I used to make the function the first time before we deleted it. And in the foreground here, I have this HelloWorldEcho.yaml file that I've placed inside of a folder called MyFunctionConfigs. You could also place this in one of your folders within your project code, which might be a preferred way to store the code as well as the deployment details together. But the key here is that in my HelloWorldEcho file, I have the same information just displayed a little bit differently. I have the tenant and namespace where I want to deploy the function as well as its name, the input topics as well as the output topic, the class name, the org.example.HelloWorldEcho, as well as the path to the jar file, and that's the relative path once again. So instead of having to put flags on in my pulsarctl command, I'm going to have one flag that points to this file. So let me show you how that works. So here we are back in terminal, and I'm going to be using the pulsarctl command to go ahead and create our functions just like we did before. So it's pulsarctl functions create. But now instead of specifying everything with flags, I specify one flag, which is going to be functionconfig file. And then I'm using, again, the relative path to a folder on my desktop called MyFunctionConfigs. And then within that folder, I've placed the YAML file, HelloWorldEcho.yaml. And when I click enter, it's going to deploy the function using all of the configs inside of that YAML file. And this is the method we're going to be using for all further videos. Going back into the UI, I can see here that the function is deployed once again.